The envelope had been opened before it reached the Duchess. Beatrice Whitmore knew it the instant her gloved fingers touched the wax, because no servant in Calderwick House would have dared crack the seal of a charity patroness unless someone above stairs had taught him that the Duchess's letters no longer belonged entirely to the Duchess. London, 1862, lay bright and damp beyond the tall windows of the morning room, where Mayfair carriages rolled past in polished lines and the bells of distant churches marked an hour Beatrice could not afford to waste. By 8 o'clock, she had corrected the seating cards for the political dinner, approved the footman's livery, sent 2 notes of regret to ladies whose husbands had quarrelled in Parliament, chosen the wine to be brought up from the cellar, and rewritten the place of a nervous baronet's wife so the poor woman would not be trapped between 2 men who enjoyed proving how much Latin they remembered. None of it was glorious work. None of it would be praised in the newspapers. Yet if a fork was placed wrong, if a guest was slighted, if a widow was seated below a younger bride, every mistake would be called the Duchess's failure before anyone remembered her name. The old brass household key hung from Beatrice's waist by a faded blue ribbon, knocking softly against the folds of her grey silk gown whenever she moved. It had been given to her on the morning after her marriage, not with tenderness, but with instruction. The key opened the west cabinet, where correspondence, account books, menus, guest lists, and household orders were kept. In 3 years, Beatrice had learned that a great house had a pulse, and it could fail from neglect as surely as any human heart. She had not let Calderwick House fail. She had merely let it take too much from her in silence. "Your Grace?" Mrs. Pike, the housekeeper, stood near the door with the stillness of a woman trained to be invisible until needed. "The second footman says Lady Verity has asked that Miss Fane be shown the dinner cards." Beatrice looked up from the broken wax. "Miss Fane?" "Yes, Your Grace." Mrs. Pike's eyes did not move toward the key, but Beatrice sensed the effort. "Lady Verity said the young lady is to help with the receiving line this evening." For one measured breath, Beatrice heard only the small fire shifting in the grate. Miss Ottilie Fane had arrived 6 weeks earlier as a poor relation of Lady Verity St. Maur, pretty in a soft, helpless way that made older women eager to arrange cushions for her and men eager to forgive her mistakes. Beatrice had nothing against the girl. That was the difficulty. Ottilie never took anything with a hand one could slap away. She was placed, offered, suggested, arranged like a vase of flowers where the hostess had once stood. "The dinner cards are not a lesson book," Beatrice said. Her voice remained low. "They will remain here." Mrs. Pike dipped her head. "Yes, Your Grace." When the housekeeper withdrew, Beatrice turned the opened envelope toward the light. The charity patroness's hand was elegant and severe. Lady Markham requested confirmation that the Duchess of Calderwick would attend the committee assembly at Hanover Square Rooms next week and wished to know whether the promised subscription had been entered under her Grace's initials. Beatrice read the line twice. She had sent no such confirmation. She had entered no such initials. The blue ribbon at her waist brushed her wrist as she reached for the ledger, and the familiar touch steadied her. There would be an explanation. There was always an explanation in a house where explanations arrived late and dressed themselves as accidents. She unlocked the west cabinet. The hinge gave its usual whisper. Inside, every bundle sat in its proper place except one. The charity correspondence had been shifted from the upper shelf to the lower drawer. Beatrice was still looking at the empty space it had left when a light laugh sounded from the adjoining drawing-room. "No, no, my dear," Lady Verity was saying, her voice warm enough to pour over poison. "A duchess must never look as though she has labored. Effort is for companions and clerks. Grace is the art of making others believe the house arranged itself." Beatrice closed the cabinet. She did not slam it. A Duchess of Calderwick did not slam doors in her own house, even when her own house had begun to answer another woman's voice. She stepped into the drawing-room with the ledger beneath one arm. Lady Verity stood beside the mantel in mauve silk, her widow's cap arranged with such careful modesty that it drew more attention than jewels would have done. Ottilie Fane sat near the tea-table, blonde head bowed, cheeks pink, a picture of sweet embarrassment. "Beatrice," Lady Verity said. She used the Christian name with the smooth confidence of family privilege. "There you are. I was only telling Ottilie how naturally she takes to a room. Some women are born with warmth. It cannot be taught, however carefully one studies." Ottilie looked up quickly. "Oh, Lady Verity, don't say that. Her Grace must think me dreadfully presumptuous." "I think you are young," Beatrice replied. "Those are often confused by others, Miss Fane." Ottilie's blush deepened, but whether from shame or triumph Beatrice could not tell. Lady Verity smiled as if Beatrice had said something charming and unfortunate. "You work too hard, my dear. Everyone says so. His Grace needs ease when he comes home from Parliament, not account books and committee letters. A political man is softened by brightness." "His Grace is not a loaf of bread," Beatrice said. "He does not require softening." Ottilie made a tiny sound, almost a laugh, then turned it into a cough. Lady Verity's gaze dipped to the key at Beatrice's waist. The glance lasted no longer than a second. It landed like a fingertip on a bruise. "Still carrying that old thing? How devoted you are to symbols." Beatrice placed the ledger on the writing table. "Symbols are useful when people remember what they mean." "A household changes when its keys change hands," Lady Verity said gently. "Sometimes for the better." Before Beatrice could answer, the door opened, and every servant in the room became more upright. His Grace Adrian Whitmore, Duke of Calderwick, entered with the cold force of a man who had spent the day among men determined to mistake volume for power. He was tall, dark-haired, and exactingly dressed, with a face that society called severe because it did not know what loneliness looked like when bred into manners. His black coat still carried the dampness of the street. His gloves were in one hand. His gaze found Beatrice first, as it always did, and passed over her with something like relief before duty shuttered it. "Your Grace," Lady Verity said, brightening. "You are earlier than expected." "Parliament became intolerable," Adrian replied. "So I came home to something better organized." His eyes returned to Beatrice. "The dinner arrangements are completed." "Nearly," Beatrice said. "There is a question of the charity correspondence." Lady Verity moved before the sentence could settle. "Poor Beatrice has been buried in papers all morning. Ottilie and I were just discussing how she might be spared a little tonight." Adrian's gaze shifted to his aunt. Her Grace had not finished. The words were quiet. The room changed around them. Even Ottilie's lashes stopped fluttering. A small, foolish warmth rose in Beatrice's chest before she could prevent it. That was the danger of Adrian. He could fail to see the wound for weeks, then touch the exact edge of it with one sentence and make her remember why she had once believed marriage might become more than an arrangement between houses. Lady Verity inclined her head. "Of course. I only meant to help." "Help is most useful when requested," Adrian said. Then, as if the matter had been settled, he turned back to Beatrice. "What of the correspondence?" Beatrice opened the charity letter and laid it before him. "This seal was broken before it reached me. Lady Markham refers to a subscription entered under my initials. I made no such entry." Adrian read the line. His expression did not change, but his thumb stilled on the paper. "Who handled this?" "That is what I intend to learn." "Then learn it," he said. "And tell me what you require." It was not tenderness. It was not even trust in the language most women would have wished for. Yet it was authority placed, for the moment, behind her own. Beatrice bowed her head a fraction. "Thank you." His gaze dropped to her wrist. "Your glove is fraying." She looked down. A pale thread had loosened near the seam, just where the brass key sometimes rubbed when she worked too quickly. "It is only the fabric." Adrian reached as if to take her hand, then seemed to remember they were not alone. His fingers stopped in the air between them. The restraint was more intimate than touch. "Have it replaced," he said. "You notice the glove," Lady Verity murmured, smiling. "How attentive." Adrian's face cooled. "I notice what is before me." Beatrice wanted to believe that. She wanted it so sharply that she looked away first. The butler entered with the final seating plan on a silver salver. Beatrice took it, grateful for any task that required no confession of feeling. The first names were as she had written them. Then she saw the mark. Beside his Grace, in fresh black ink, Miss Ottilie Fane had been placed where the Duchess of Calderwick belonged. Beatrice stared at the page until every sound in the room thinned to silence. The key at her waist gave one small, hollow knock against the table. For one impossible second, Beatrice thought the ink might rearrange itself if she looked long enough. It did not. Miss Ottilie Fane remained written in the place reserved for the Duchess of Calderwick, her name slanting in a newer, darker hand beside His Grace, as though the very paper had accepted what the household had only been whispering. The silence in the drawing-room grew so complete that Beatrice heard the faint scratch of coal in the grate and the distant thud of a footman lowering a crate in the servants' passage. Adrian reached for the seating plan. "Who altered this?" His voice did not rise, which made every syllable more dangerous. The butler, Mr. Harrow, stood rigid beside the salver. "I cannot say, Your Grace. It was delivered to me from the small writing-room." "By whom?" "The second footman, Your Grace. He said it had been corrected upstairs." Lady Verity gave a soft sigh, as if weary of watching men become dramatic over trifles. "Adrian, really, must we turn a practical adjustment into an inquiry? Lady Markham's husband and Lord Pelham cannot be seated together after last week's speech." Miss Fane was merely moved to preserve conversation. "Miss Fane was moved into my wife's place," Adrian said. Ottilie's eyes filled at once. She did not weep. She only looked as though tears had gathered out of obedience to an atmosphere that required them. "Please, Your Grace, I had no notion. I would never presume. I don't want anyone to think I asked for such a thing." Beatrice studied the girl's folded hands. The fingers were smooth, soft, unmarked by ink or household keys. Ottilie had the gift of appearing innocent while standing exactly where innocence benefited her. It was a useful talent. Beatrice had never possessed it. "No one has accused you of asking," Beatrice said. "Then perhaps we might not make her feel accused," Lady Verity replied, with a faint edge beneath the kindness. "Ottilie is sensitive. And she does have a talent for drawing people out. You must admit, Beatrice, His Grace's political guests can be very stiff. A little brightness beside him would not be unwelcome." Adrian's gaze went to his aunt. "My wife is not furniture to be moved for brightness." The words should have comforted Beatrice. They did, for a moment. Then he looked back at the card and added, "Still, the dinner begins in less than 2 hours. Changing the entire arrangement now may create a visible disturbance." There it was. Not cruelty. Not betrayal. Something colder because it dressed itself as reason. Beatrice felt the first small fracture open beneath her ribs, quiet as hairline porcelain. "The visible disturbance," she said, "would be my sitting where I was first placed." Adrian looked at her then, truly looked, and confusion crossed his face before it hardened into control. "That is not what I said." "No," Beatrice answered. "It is what the room will understand." Lady Verity moved closer, bringing with her the faint scent of lavender and old authority. "My dear, you are overwrought. No one is taking anything from you. A duchess must be above such little humiliations." "Then you admit it is one," Beatrice said. Lady Verity's smile held. Only her eyes changed. "I admit society often notices what we wish it would not. That is why one must manage appearances before they manage us." Adrian set the seating plan on the table. "The arrangement will be corrected." Beatrice inhaled, and for one heartbeat relief warmed her. "After dinner," he said. The warmth vanished. "Tonight, we avoid spectacle. Tomorrow, I will speak to everyone responsible." "Tomorrow," Beatrice repeated. The word tasted like every postponed conversation in their marriage. Tomorrow he would ask why she had gone quiet. Tomorrow he would notice Lady Verity had begun approving menus. Tomorrow he would wonder why footmen looked to Ottilie when Beatrice entered. Tomorrow was a room in which neglected things were stored until they spoiled. Adrian lowered his voice. "Beatrice, I am not dismissing this. I am asking for one evening. You are asking me to lend my place to another woman so no one will be embarrassed by the theft." Ottilie stood quickly, her chair whispering over the carpet. "I cannot bear this. I shall sit anywhere. Truly, I don't care if I sit beside the old colonel with the ear trumpet. I only wanted to help." The performance was delicate, almost faultless. Beatrice would have admired it if she had not been its cost. Lady Verity placed a gloved hand on Ottilie's shoulder. "You see? The poor child is mortified. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Miss Fane, sit where her grace places you." Ottilie curtsied. "Of course, your grace." Beatrice took up the pen from the writing table. Its nib was still wet from the unknown hand that had injured her so politely. She crossed out Ottilie's name beside the Duke with a single steady line and wrote her own in the proper place. Then she set Ottilie near Lord Pelham's unmarried sister, a position respectable enough to prevent complaint and distant enough to end the illusion. Her hand did not tremble until the pen was back in the stand. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed now, when the damage could be called resolved. "You should rest before the guests arrive," he said. "I have no time to rest." "Then take time." "From what?" Beatrice asked. "The letters opened without my knowledge? The charity account entered under my initials? The dinner plan altered in another hand? Tell me which duty I may neglect without society finding the neglect and naming it mine." His face changed. The political mast slipped just enough for unease to show beneath it. "The charity matter will be dealt with." "By whom?" "By us." It was the kindest thing he had said all day. It was also late. Before Beatrice could answer, Lady Verity lifted the charity letter from the table as if it were merely another invitation to tea. "Lady Markham does enjoy making herself important. I should not fret over it. These committees thrive on confusion." Beatrice took the letter back. "It was addressed to me." "Naturally. Then it will remain with me." Lady Verity released it a fraction too slowly. Their gloves touched. Beatrice felt the pressure, light and warning. Adrian did not see it. He had turned toward the window, where the first carriage lamps began to gleam through the damp London afternoon. The house was waking into performance. Upstairs, maids would be fastening pearls and smoothing skirts. Below, the kitchen would be trembling with heat. In the hall, footmen would soon align themselves like polished chess pieces. Every person under this roof knew his place. Only Beatrice's seemed available for negotiation. By 7:30, Calderwick House glittered with disciplined splendor. Candlelight glowed along the gilded frames and flashed in the mirrors until the drawing-room appeared larger than it was, grander than it felt. Beatrice stood near the receiving line in pale grey silk, her repaired glove hidden beneath a fold of lace and the brass key resting against her waist. Adrian stood a few feet away, immaculate and distant, speaking with Lord Ainsmere about a bill before the Lords. Lady Verity hovered like a benevolent shadow. Ottilie, dressed in blue muslin that made her look younger than her years, remained at Beatrice's left, exactly close enough to be noticed and exactly far enough to deny intention. The first guests entered. Titles were announced. Hands were offered. Smiles were arranged. Beatrice performed every movement with the precision expected of her and the fatigue permitted to no one. Then Lady Davenel, a marchioness with diamonds sharp enough to wound by reflection, paused before Ottilie and laughed. "Well, Lady Verity, what a charming addition. The child looks almost duchess-like standing there." The words floated lightly. They struck heavily. Beatrice felt the room lean toward them. Ottilie lowered her lashes. Lady Verity's smile widened by the smallest measure. Adrian turned. "There is only one Duchess of Calderwick," he said. No one spoke. Lady Davenel's diamonds quivered as her throat moved. "Of course, Your Grace. I meant only that Miss Fane is very pretty." "Then say that," Adrian replied. "Do not confuse prettiness with rank." A flush climbed Ottilie's neck. Lady Verity gave a graceful little laugh meant to save everyone. "Adrian, you are severe tonight." "I am accurate." The correction should have ended it. Instead, it sharpened the wound because Beatrice saw what everyone else saw. The Duke would defend her title. Yet the chair beside him at dinner had nearly been given away by another hand, and only Beatrice's own vigilance had restored it. He would correct a marchioness in public, but in private he had still asked her to endure the insult for one evening. That was the ache of it. He protected the name more easily than the woman. As the guests moved onward, Beatrice reached for a fresh card from the salver and found another envelope tucked beneath it. The wax bore the mark of the charity committee, but the edge had been warmed and pressed closed again. Someone had opened this one too. She slipped it beneath the fold of her program before Lady Verity could notice. Adrian's gaze caught the movement. Another letter, he asked softly. Yes. Show me after dinner. Beatrice looked at him. After dinner, she said, and this time he heard the echo. His expression tightened, but Lady Verity had already stepped between them with effortless timing. Ottilie, my dear, she murmured, not quite quietly enough, stand nearer His Grace when the late arrivals come in. The room must see what is possible. Beatrice's fingers closed around the hidden letter. Across the candlelit room, Adrian turned at the sound of his aunt's voice, but not before Beatrice saw Ottilie take one obedient step toward him. Ottilie's step toward Adrian was so small that a careless observer might have missed it, but Beatrice had spent 3 years learning how a household confessed itself through inches. A chair angled half a foot from its proper place meant a guest had been favored. A tray placed too near the door meant a servant expected interruption. A young woman moving one quiet step toward the Duke of Calderwick, after Lady Verity had instructed her that the room must see what was possible, meant the insult had stopped pretending to be accidental. Beatrice stood with the opened letter hidden beneath her program and felt the brass key at her waist touch her wrist like a warning. The next guests entered beneath the crystal chandeliers, laughing softly as though Calderwick House had not become a stage on which its Duchess was being erased in full view of London. Adrian turned his head at last. His eyes moved from Ottilie to Lady Verity, then to Beatrice. Something in his face tightened, but Lord Ainsmere was already at his elbow, murmuring about a vote in the Lords, and the moment passed into that polished graveyard where uncomfortable truths went to die. Miss Fane, Beatrice said. Her voice carried no farther than the circle nearest them, yet it was clear enough to stop Ottilie's second step. Lady Davenel is waiting for someone to show her the portrait gallery. You were admiring the Van Dykes this morning. Ottilie blinked. Of course, Your Grace. I didn't realize. No, Beatrice said. I expect not. Lady Verity's smile did not falter. How thoughtful of you, Beatrice. Even now, you are arranging everyone. It is my duty. Indeed. Though one hopes duty does not exhaust all pleasure. Adrian heard that. Beatrice saw his attention sharpen, but again he did not speak quickly enough. Silence opened, and Lady Verity filled it as she always did. Poor child, she said, turning slightly toward a cluster of ladies near the mantel. Her Grace has carried so much lately. I have urged her to rest, but she is stubborn about the keys and papers. Some women cannot bear to put burdens down, even when gentler hands are ready. A murmur moved through the group. Not loud. Loudness would have been vulgar. This was worse. This was sympathy sharpened into judgment. Lady Davenel, who had not yet left for the gallery, lifted her fan. How fortunate, then, that Miss Fane is so willing. A great house must have someone cheerful at its centre. Beatrice looked at the faces before her. They were all well bred enough to pretend no injury had been delivered. Their eyes betrayed them. They were measuring whether the Duchess would protest and lower herself, or remain silent and confirm that she could be set aside without consequence. Adrian stepped forward. My aunt overstates the matter. The words were correct. They were also insufficient. Lady Verity gave him a fond look. I state only what everyone can see. Beatrice needs peace. Ottilie has youth and ease. There is no shame in allowing a fresh spirit to represent the house for an evening. The hidden letter bent beneath Beatrice's fingers. Its worn seal had left a faint tackiness on the paper, and when she drew it free from her program, a small torn corner came away. On that torn piece, beneath the broken wax, there was a line of handwriting. Not Lady Markham's. Not hers. A slanted B, then the beginning of a W, formed by a hand trying too hard to imitate her own. The room blurred for one breath, then returned in cruel detail. Candle flame. Diamond comb. Ottilie's parted lips. Lady Verity's gloved hand resting near the silver salver. Adrian's face, controlled and troubled, but still not alarmed enough. Adrian, Beatrice said. She did not call him Your Grace. His gaze came to her instantly. Yes? Do you require me to remain as hostess tonight? The question landed with more force than she had intended. Several fans stilled. A footman near the door lowered his eyes. Adrian's brows drew together. Of course I require you. Lady Verity laughed softly, as though rescuing them all from melodrama. What a dramatic question. No one is asking you to vanish, my dear. We only meant that Miss Fane might stand in the receiving line beside His Grace for the late arrivals. You have had such delicate nerves all evening. Beatrice turned to her. Have I? It would be kinder not to force yourself. Kinder to whom? The smile thinned. To the house. Adrian said, Aunt Verity, enough. That should have ended it. It might have, if he had said it before the words had settled into the ears of half the room. It might have, if he had moved to Beatrice's side instead of standing between duty and embarrassment, trying to preserve both. It might have, if Beatrice had not suddenly understood that preservation was the true rival in her marriage. Not Ottilie. Not even Lady Verity. Preservation. The smooth keeping of appearances at any cost, especially when the cost could be paid by a woman trained not to make a scene. Lady Davenel's fan lifted again. Well, every grand house trains a successor eventually, does it not? A little laugh followed. Then died. Beatrice felt no anger rise. That surprised her. Anger would have been warm. What filled her instead was a cold, lucid quiet, as if some inner door had opened and shown her a corridor out. She looked at Adrian, and for the first time that evening, she did not hope he would understand before she spoke. Hope had made her patient too long. She drew the brass key from the ribbon at her waist. The knock caught. The old blue silk had frayed nearly through, and when she pulled, it gave way with a soft tear. Adrian's eyes dropped to her hand. Beatrice. Her name, spoken that way, trembled through the room. Too late. She placed the key on the silver salver beside the calling cards. The sound was small. It silenced everyone. If Miss Fane is to receive your guests, review your correspondence, ease your political guests, and represent the house when I am considered inconvenient, then there is no practical reason for me to stand in her way. Ottilie went pale. Your Grace, please, I don't want this. Then you should have stepped back when you were placed forward. The girl flinched, but Beatrice's gaze had already returned to Adrian. His face had lost its color beneath the candlelight. Do not do this here, he said quietly. I did not begin it here. Lady Verity moved swiftly, all silk and alarm. Beatrice, you are unwell. This is exactly what I feared. Adrian, surely you see that she should be taken upstairs. No, Beatrice said. One word. It stopped the older woman more effectively than any raised voice could have done. Mrs. Vale, who had been seated near the wall as Beatrice's invited companion for the evening, rose at once. Sensible, grey-haired, and unshakably discreet, she crossed the room without asking a question. Beatrice was grateful beyond speech. She looked at Adrian one last time. In his eyes she saw the beginning of comprehension, and worse, the beginning of grief. He reached for the key, but did not touch it. Beatrice, wait. We'll speak privately. We have been private for 3 years, she said. It did not save me. The room held its breath. Beatrice lifted her chin. Her voice remained quiet. Replace me, then. No one moved. Then Beatrice turned and walked out of the drawing room. Not quickly. Not dramatically. She moved with the pace expected of a duchess leaving one room for another, because dignity was the last possession no one could remove unless she surrendered it. Behind her, Adrian said her name again, no longer controlled. She did not turn. In the hall, Mr. Harrow stood ashen-faced, the front doors already being opened by footmen who understood disaster even when it wore satin. The carriage, Beatrice said. Mrs. Vale travels with me. At once, Your Grace. Rain had begun, fine and silver under the lamps, dampening the stone steps and darkening the horses' coats. Mrs. Vale climbed in after her without a word. Only when the carriage door closed did Beatrice look down and see that the torn corner of the charity letter was still in her hand. The forged curve of her initials stared up from the paper like a stranger wearing her face. The carriage lurched forward. From the doorway of Calderwick House, Adrian emerged without his hat, his evening coat stark against the spill of golden light. Stop the carriage, he called. The coachman hesitated, but Beatrice leaned toward the small window. "Drive on." Mrs. Vale's hand closed gently over hers. The house fell back, bright and terrible, its windows watching like 100 polished eyes. Beatrice did not cry. She had the torn letter. She had her name. She had, at last, the terrible freedom of having left behind the key. Adrian did not move until the carriage lamps had vanished into the wet dark beyond the square. The open doorway of Calderwick House stood behind him, pouring gold onto the rain-slick steps, while London watched from behind curtains and passing carriage glass. He had commanded armies of clerks, silenced peers twice his age, and bent impossible votes into order by sheer patience, yet the only order he wanted obeyed had left him like a fool in the rain. "Your Grace," Mr. Harrow said behind him, very softly. Adrian looked down. In his right hand was the brass key Beatrice had left on the silver salver. He did not remember taking it. The torn blue ribbon hung from it like a small, exhausted flag. For a moment he could not breathe around the sight of it. He had seen the ribbon 1,000 times at her waist, heard the little knock of the key when she crossed the morning room, watched her unlock cabinets, correct letters, and mend the quiet disasters of his house before they reached his notice. He had mistaken constancy for contentment. He had mistaken silence for peace. "Close the door," he said. His voice sounded unfamiliar. "And no one leaves the house without my permission." Mr. Harrow bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Adrian returned to the drawing room. Conversation died so quickly that the silence seemed to strike the chandeliers. Guests stood in bright clusters, stranded between curiosity and fear. Lady Davenel held her fan half open. Ottilie Fane had one hand pressed to her mouth. Lady Verity stood exactly where Beatrice had left her, composed enough to insult grief. "Adrian," she said, low and urgent. "The guests are waiting. You must not allow this unfortunate display to become the evening." He looked at her. "It is already the evening." "Then save what remains of it." No, the word carried to the farthest wall. Lady Verity's mouth tightened. "You cannot mean to abandon a political dinner because Beatrice has chosen to dramatize a misunderstanding." Something cold moved through him. Not anger, not yet. Anger required the luxury of certainty. What he had was worse. Recognition. "Do not speak of her Grace in that tone again." Ottilie stepped forward, pale and trembling. "Your Grace, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she would think I meant to take her place. Did you step back when you were asked to stand beside me?" She faltered. "I thought Lady Verity knew what was proper." "That was not my question." Her eyes filled. No, Adrian turned to the room. "My lords, ladies, I regret that Calderwick House cannot receive you tonight with the attention owed to your rank and friendship. My staff will see your carriages called. You have my apologies." A ripple passed through the guests. Lady Verity gave a soft gasp. "Adrian, you cannot dismiss them." "I have." He looked to Mr. Harrow. "No guest is to be delayed." The butler moved at once, and the room broke into careful motion. No one protested openly. A duke's humiliation was still safer to witness than to challenge. Within minutes, silk rustled toward the hall and low voices followed the departing guests like smoke. Adrian remained still until the last carriage was called. Then he turned to Lady Verity. "The Duchess's correspondence cabinet. Who has touched it?" "How should I know?" "She guards that cabinet like a miser." "You refer to the keys changing hands." "A figure of speech." "No." A trial of the words before the act. Her eyes sharpened. "Take care, Adrian. Grief can make a man unjust." "I am not grieving yet. I am counting." He looked at Mr. Harrow, who had returned to the threshold. The steward. Mrs. Pike. The senior housemaid. The second footman. Now. Lady Verity's colour altered, just slightly. That was the first true thing she had shown him all evening. Within a quarter of an hour, the small library had become a chamber of restrained terror. The rain tapped against the windows. The key lay on Adrian's desk. Mr. Cale, the estate steward, stood with a ledger beneath one arm. Mrs. Pike's hands were folded so tightly that her knuckles had whitened. The second footman, a young man named Ellis, looked as though he might be sick onto the carpet. Adrian did not raise his voice. Letters addressed to Her Grace have been opened. Dinner cards were altered. Charity entries have been made under her initials. I will ask once. Who gave instructions concerning the Duchess's cabinet? No one answered. Adrian let the silence lengthen. He had used silence in Parliament. He had never hated his own skill with it until that night, when he understood how often Beatrice must have been left inside silences not of her making. Ellis swallowed. Your Grace, I didn't open the letters. That was not what I asked. I moved them. Mrs. Pike closed her eyes. Mr. Cale turned sharply. Adrian's fingers closed over the edge of the desk. On whose order? Ellis looked toward the door as if Lady Verity might appear through the wood. Lady Verity said Her Grace was overburdened. She said some committee letters were to be placed aside until the house was calmer. She said it was family business. How long? 3 weeks, Your Grace. Perhaps 4. The number struck him more cruelly than a confession of one great crime. For weeks. For weeks of Beatrice being denied her own words, her own duties, her own authority, while he had spoken of bills and dinners and the tiresome necessity of appearances. And the cabinet? Adrian asked. Ellis shook his head quickly. I don't have a key, Your Grace. I only took what was left on the tray. Mrs. Pike lifted her head. There was another key. Adrian's gaze moved to her. Say that again. I saw one, Your Grace. Not often. Once in Lady Verity's hand, though she tucked it away when she saw me. I thought perhaps Her Grace had given permission. Her Grace did not. The words came too fast, too hard. He forced his voice back down. Where? Near the West Cabinet, Your Grace. The day after the silversmith came to repair the clasp on Lady Verity's jewel case. The room seemed to narrow around Adrian. A copied key. Opened letters. Forged initials. His wife standing with a torn scrap hidden in her hand while he asked her to bear one more evening. He took up the brass key Beatrice had left behind. The metal was warm now from his palm. From this moment, he said, no correspondence under the Duchess's name leaves this house. No invitation, no subscription, no order, no note of regret. Lady Verity and Miss Fane are not to act, write, receive, or reply on behalf of Her Grace in any capacity. If any servant receives a contrary instruction, he or she will bring it to me directly. There will be no dismissal for obedience to that order. Mr. Cale bowed. Mrs. Pike's eyes shone with relief she was too disciplined to show. Ellis whispered, Yes, Your Grace. Adrian turned to Mr. Harrow. Send a rider to learn the direction of Her Grace's carriage. At once. No pursuit that frightens her. No demand. Only learn that she is safe. He sat at his desk only after the door closed. The room smelled of rain, wax, and old leather. He drew out a sheet of paper. For several minutes, the pen did not move. Commands came easily to him. Apologies did not. At last he wrote, not as a duke issuing correction, but as a husband discovering the ruin beneath his own roof. My dearest Beatrice, I do not ask you to return tonight. I have no right to ask anything while the sound of your leaving is still in this house. I only ask to know that you are safe. I did not replace you. I failed to defend you before I understood I was losing you. That failure is mine. No one will use your name or your place in this house again while I draw breath. Adrian folded the letter, sealed it with black wax, then stopped and broke the seal before it hardened. Too formal. Too much like every document that had made her smaller. He took another sheet and wrote the same words by hand, left it unsealed inside a plain cover, and addressed it himself. More than 40 miles away, near the Kent Road, Beatrice watched the rain gather on the carriage window until Calderwick House became impossible to imagine except as light behind her. Mrs. Vale dozed lightly across from her, upright even in sleep. The torn scrap of charity letter lay in Beatrice's reticule. She touched it once, then let it go. Near dawn, Larkmere House emerged from grey mist, modest, square, and worn at the edges, with ivy dark against the walls and no grandeur large enough to demand gratitude. The caretaker's wife cried out when she saw the Duchess on the steps, then gathered herself and opened the door wide. Beatrice entered with damp skirts and a steady face. She did not ask for the best room. She asked for ink, fire, and hot tea for Mrs. Vale. By noon, Adrian's letter arrived. Beatrice knew his handwriting before the servant spoke. For half an hour, the plain cover remained on the table beside her untouched cup. "Will you read it, Your Grace?" Mrs. Vale asked gently. "No," Beatrice said. Then, after the fire settled and the quiet became less like freedom and more like grief, she broke the cover with careful fingers. She read the first lines without tears. She read the last line twice. When she folded the letter again, her hand shook only once. "He understands that he failed," Mrs. Vale said. Beatrice looked toward the rain-dimmed window. "Understanding," she answered, "is only the first door." By the second morning at Larkmere House, Beatrice had learned the comfort of rooms that did not expect her to apologize for occupying them. The house stood a little more than 40 miles from London, set behind a narrow lane in Kent where hedges bent over the road and rainwater gathered in the wheel ruts. It was not grand. Its plaster had cracked in the upper corridor, one chimney smoked when the wind came from the east, and the breakfast parlour held only 6 chairs, 2 of which wobbled. Yet when Beatrice sat at the small writing table with Mrs. Vale near the fire and the caretaker's wife bringing tea without trembling, she felt a strange, painful ease. No one asked whether Miss Fane might arrange the cups more prettily. No one suggested that a younger woman could make the room warmer. No one touched her letters before her hand did. That alone was enough to make the silence feel almost kind. She had spent the morning setting the house in order because grief without occupation had sharp teeth. She wrote to the local grocer, paid the caretaker's overdue account, instructed that the damp linen be aired, and asked for the small east bedroom to be prepared for a maid who would arrive by the afternoon coach. Mrs. Vale watched her over her spectacles. "You are building a fortress out of household lists, Your Grace. A fortress would have better chimneys. But fewer towels accounted for so precisely." Beatrice looked down at the paper and almost smiled. It did not last, but it was something. At noon, while the sky hung low and grey beyond the windows, the maid arrived with a single trunk, a plain bonnet, and fear carried so carefully that it looked like manners. Martha Ives was no more than 22, perhaps 23, with brown hair pinned without vanity and eyes that moved first to Beatrice's face, then to the floor. She curtsied deeply. "Your Grace. I thank you for receiving me." Beatrice noticed the patched cuff, the tired shoes, the way the girl held her reticule as though it contained her whole remaining life. "Mrs. Vale tells me you were dismissed from Calderwick House last month." Martha's throat moved. "Yes, Your Grace." "On what grounds?" "Carelessness with correspondence." The answer sounded rehearsed, not because it was false, but because it had been repeated in shame. "Did you mishandle correspondence?" "No, Your Grace." Beatrice set down her pen. "Then sit." Martha looked startled. Servants were not invited to sit in the morning room of duchesses. Larkmere House, however, was no longer Calderwick House, and Beatrice found the difference useful. "You have travelled 40 miles, she said. "Sit before you fall." Martha sat on the edge of the chair, hands clenched in her lap. Mrs. Vale poured tea and placed it near her without comment. "Tell me what happened," Beatrice said. Martha stared at the cup as if kindness were more difficult to bear than accusation. "There was a packet of notes for you, Your Grace. I placed them on the silver tray outside the west cabinet, as I always did when Mrs. Pike had not yet come down. Later, Lady Verity asked whether they had been delivered. I said I believed so. She said belief was not service. The next morning, Mr. Harrow told me I had been dismissed for mislaying a committee letter." "Which committee?" "Lady Markham's Charity Committee, Your Grace." Beatrice felt the small room grow still. "The same committee. The same pattern. Did Lady Verity touch the packet?" Martha hesitated. Fear returned to her face, trained and obedient. Beatrice softened her voice. "You are not under Calderwick House authority here. Everyone is under Calderwick House authority somewhere, Martha whispered. The words struck harder because they were true. Beatrice folded her hands over the torn corner of the letter hidden beneath her blotter. Not in this room. Martha looked up. Something in Beatrice's face must have convinced her. I saw Lady Verity near the cabinet after breakfast the same day. She had something in her hand, Your Grace. It looked like a little disc of wax, pressed flat. She closed her fist when she saw me. Mrs. Vale's knitting stopped. Beatrice did not move. A wax impression. I couldn't say for certain. But a silversmith had come that morning. Lady Verity said he was mending the clasp on her jewel case. Did he go near the cabinet? Not while I saw. But Lady Verity did. And later, one of the lower maids said there was talk of a spare key being needed because her Grace was overburdened. Beatrice turned her head toward the window. The rain had thinned into mist, leaving the garden blurred and pale. A spare key. Not merely opened letters. Not merely altered seating. A copy of the authority she had worn for 3 years, made quietly while she sat in the next room believing herself tired rather than robbed. Thank you, Martha, she said. You may remain at Larkmere if you wish. Wages will be fair, and no false reference from Calderwick House will follow you. Martha's eyes filled so quickly that she looked ashamed of them. Your Grace, I don't know what to say. Say nothing for now. Eat something. Mrs. Vale will show you the kitchen. When the maid had gone, Mrs. Vale set down her knitting. You believe her? Yes. So do I. Beatrice drew out the torn scrap of charity letter. The forged curve of her initials looked worse in daylight. Less like a mistake. More like practice. Lady Verity did not want to help Ottilie shine, Beatrice said. She wanted access. To what? Correspondence. Patronage. Subscriptions. Perhaps household funds. Perhaps influence I have not yet seen. Mrs. Vale's expression tightened. And His Grace? Beatrice did not answer at once. Adrian's letter lay in the drawer beside her knee. She had read it 3 times since dawn, once with anger, once with sorrow, and once with a terrible tenderness she refused to name. He is looking now, she said at last. He should have looked before. Yes. Mrs. Vale's agreement was gentle, not soothing. That made it bearable. A quarter of an hour later, the caretaker's boy came running up the lane with news that a carriage had stopped at the gate. Not the great Calderwick travelling coach, but a plain dark carriage with no crest displayed. Beatrice knew before Mrs. Vale spoke. Her heart betrayed her with one heartbeat. His Grace? Mrs. Vale asked. Most likely. Beatrice stood. Is he at the door? The boy shook his wet cap in both hands. No, Your Grace. He gave a card to Mr. Pritchard and said he would wait by the gate unless Your Grace wished otherwise. That hurt in a different way. Permission. Distance. A man accustomed to entering any room in England had stopped at the boundary of a small Kent house because she had not invited him past it. Beatrice looked at Mrs. Vale. The older woman said nothing. Good companions knew when silence was a door left unlatched. Show His Grace to the morning room, Beatrice said. Mrs. Vale will remain. Adrian entered 10 minutes later with rain on his coat and exhaustion beneath his eyes. He bowed to Mrs. Vale first, then to Beatrice, as if courtesy were the only bridge he trusted not to collapse beneath him. He did not reach for her hand. He did not look around the room as though measuring what it lacked. His gaze remained on her face, and that made it harder to remain cold. Thank you for receiving me, he said. I had not decided whether I would. I know. Mrs. Vale took a chair near the window, close enough for propriety and far enough for mercy. Adrian stood until Beatrice Saturday. Only then did he take the chair opposite her. The space between them was scarcely 3 feet. It felt like the length of a country. Martha Ives arrived today, Beatrice said. I restored her wages and reference yesterday, Adrian answered. I dismissed the accusation against her from the household record. Beatrice had not expected the quickness of that. She hid the effect by lifting her teacup. Because you believed her. Because I believed you. Her testimony confirmed what I should have known. Silence followed. Outside, water dripped from the eaves in a slow, even count. Adrian drew a folded paper from his coat and laid it on the table, not near her hand, but within sight. A list of correspondence withheld from you. Mrs. Pike and Mr. Harrow have begun reconstructing it. No note will leave Calderwick House under your name. Not one. That protects my name, Beatrice said. Not what was done to me. His face changed, not defensively. Painfully. No. It does not. The answer was so bare that she had to look away. She had prepared herself for arguments, explanations, perhaps even the arrogance of a man who thought remorse could command forgiveness. She had not prepared for this restraint. Lady Verity had a wax impression, Beatrice said. Martha saw it. Adrian's jaw tightened. Mrs. Pike saw another key in my aunt's hand. Beatrice's fingers curled around the edge of her cup. Then there is a copy. I believe so. And the silversmith. I am seeking him. You are seeking him now. Yes. The old Adrian would have said more. He would have explained his strategy, his authority, his certainty. This Adrian stopped because she had not asked for those things. Beatrice felt the difference and resented how much it mattered. Why did you come? She asked. To ask whether you are safe. To tell you what has been stopped. To hear what you will allow me to do next. Allow? Yes. He held her gaze. I have given enough orders around your pain. The words found the room's most fragile place. Mrs. Vale lowered her eyes to her knitting, though the needles did not move. Beatrice felt her throat tighten and hated it. I left because I finally believed myself, she said. Not because I wanted you to follow. I know. Do you? I am beginning to. It was not enough. It was more than yesterday. Both truths stood between them. Beatrice reached into the drawer and took out his letter. His eyes went to it, then away, as if he had no right even to hope she had kept it. You wrote that no one would use my place again while you draw breath. Yes. That is not a promise you may make only in anger. It was not anger. She looked at him. What was it? Adrian's hand rested open on his knee, empty without the key he had brought back to London. The first honest terror of my life. The fire settled with a soft fall of ash. Beatrice did not forgive him. She did not reach across the small distance between them. But when Mrs. Vale rose to ring for fresh tea, Beatrice did not stop her. Adrian remained seated, waiting, as though the privilege of staying in that room for one more cup was more than he deserved. And for the first time since leaving Calderwick House, Beatrice allowed herself to breathe without feeling that the breath had been stolen from someone else. The next morning, London began speaking for Beatrice before she had finished her tea. The gossip sheet arrived at Larkmere House folded beneath a letter from the local grocer, its cheap paper damp from the road and its ink already smudging at the edges. Mrs. Vale saw the heading first and made the small mistake of becoming too still. Beatrice held out her hand. If it concerns me, I prefer not to hear it softened. Mrs. Vale hesitated only a moment before passing it across the breakfast table. The paragraph was brief, polished, and cruel in the way London preferred its cruelty. It did not accuse the Duchess of Calderwick of leaving her husband. It merely wondered why her Grace had withdrawn so suddenly from the duties of her rank. It did not say she had abandoned her household. It suggested that certain great houses required steadier hands in moments of political importance. It did not name Miss Ottilie Fane. It mentioned a young relation whose sweetness had been much remarked upon during the recent confusion in Mayfair. Beatrice read it twice. The words should have burned. Instead, they settled like ash. How efficient, she said. Lady Verity wastes no horses. Mrs. Vale's mouth tightened. This could have come from any drawing room. Yes. That is how one hides a knife in society. One lets a dozen people touch the handle. Martha Ives stood near the sideboard, carrying a pot of tea that no one needed. Colour had drained from her face. Your Grace, they'll say you ran away because you were caught in something. Beatrice looked at her. Then we must be careful that the truth does not run slower than the lie. Before noon, a second letter came. This one bore the severe hand of Lady Markham's charity committee and smelled faintly of damp wool from the post bag. Beatrice opened it herself. No seal had been tampered with this time. That small mercy made the contents colder. Lady Markham wrote that the committee had become concerned by irregularities in a promised subscription recorded under the initials BW. The amount was not ruinous. That was clever. A large theft would have demanded formal outrage. A smaller irregularity invited whispers. Carelessness. Confusion. A duchess overburdened. A wife unstable enough to leave a dinner party and muddle charity accounts. Beatrice laid the letter beside the torn scrap she had carried from Calderwick House. The forged initials were alike, though not identical. The hand had improved between attempts. "She is practicing me," Beatrice said. Mrs. Vale leaned closer. The first was rougher. The second expected to be believed. Martha clasped her hands. "Lady Verity had time, Your Grace. If she took letters for weeks, she could copy your hand from any note." Beatrice nodded. "And if she could copy my hand, she could copy my authority." In London, Adrian had already reached the same conclusion, though the knowledge brought no satisfaction. Calderwick House felt wrong without Beatrice. It had always been too large, too disciplined, too full of portraits that judged the living for breathing differently than the dead. Yet now every room seemed to expose its own dependence on the woman whose absent society had begun to mock. The morning room held no ordered stack of replies. The West cabinet remained locked by his command, the brass key in his desk drawer, useless because the woman to whom it belonged was 40 miles away. In the drawing room, Lady Verity had arranged a tea table as if nothing irreparable had happened. Ottilie Fane sat beside her in pale green, pouring for 2 visiting ladies who should never have been admitted while the household was under inquiry. Adrian stopped in the doorway. The footman behind him froze with the tray of calling cards. Lady Verity looked up with practiced surprise. "Adrian, you are home early." Apparently not early enough. One of the visiting ladies lowered her cup. Ottilie rose at once. "Your Grace, I can go. I don't want to intrude." "Then do not sit in that chair." The room went silent. Ottilie glanced down, confused. She had taken the carved chair near the hearth, the chair where Beatrice received morning callers, its height and placement chosen less for comfort than authority. Lady Verity laughed gently. "It is only a chair." "No," Adrian said. "It is Her Grace's chair." Ottilie stepped away as if the wood had become hot. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Now you do." Lady Verity's face cooled by degrees. "You are making the poor girl afraid of upholstery." "I am making the household remember its duchess." The visiting ladies found sudden interest in their gloves. Adrian turned to the footman. "No further callers are to be shown in for Lady Verity or Miss Fane without my approval. Any card addressed to the Duchess is to be placed in my study unopened and logged by Mr. Harrow." Lady Verity set down her cup. "This is excessive." "What you permitted was excessive." "What I permitted?" Her voice remained elegant, but the edge beneath it had sharpened. "I have spent years preserving this family's appearance while you buried yourself in Parliament and Beatrice buried herself in ledgers. If I assisted where warmth was lacking, I did so for Calderwick. Do not use the name of my house as a curtain." Ottilie looked between them, tears gathering. "Please don't quarrel because of me." Adrian looked at her, and for the first time, he did not see merely a foolish young woman arranged by someone stronger. He saw someone who had enjoyed the arrangement while pretending not to understand its shape. "This is not because of you alone, Miss Fane. But if you are wise, you will stop accepting what is handed to you when it belongs to another woman." He left before Lady Verity could answer and went directly to the steward's office, where Mr. Cale had laid out the charity ledgers, household accounts, subscription lists, and copies of notes retrieved from servants' trays. For an hour, Adrian forced himself through the dull machinery of deceit. Dates. Amounts. Initials. Deliveries. Delay marks in the butler's log. There, near the bottom of a subscription sheet for Lady Markham's committee, stood BW. The letters were close enough to disturb him. Not exact. Beatrice's B had a restrained curve, almost severe. This one leaned too prettily, as if trying to be graceful. This entry was not made by Her Grace, Adrian said. Mr. Cale adjusted his spectacles. No, Your Grace. I compared it with her usual hand. Whoever wrote this had seen her signature, but not often enough to master it. Who entered the paper into the household file? It arrived among the committee replies held back from Her Grace. The lower tray was marked for review by Lady Verity. Adrian's hands rested flat on the desk. He remembered Beatrice's question from the dinner night. From what duty could she take time without society naming the neglect hers? Now he had his answer. None. Every stolen letter had been shaped into a future accusation. Every delayed reply had been arranged to make her look careless. Every small breach had waited for the moment London would be ready to believe she had failed. Send a note to Lady Markham, he said. Formal, not defensive. State that no conclusion is to be drawn regarding Her Grace until she has been heard, and that I will consider any public speculation premature. Mr. Cale looked relieved. Yes, Your Grace. Adrian paused. No. I will write it myself. At Larkmere, Beatrice received a copy of that note by evening, along with a shorter letter in Adrian's own hand. He did not plead. He did not ask to come again. He wrote only that he had seen the forged initials, that he believed her, and that Lady Markham had been warned not to judge in her absence. Beatrice read the words by the parlour fire while Mrs. Vale mended a cuff and Martha sorted linen near the door. The letter should have comforted her. It did, which made it dangerous. She folded it carefully and placed it beneath the first letter in the small drawer of the writing table. Not hidden. Not displayed. Kept. Mrs. Vale saw the gesture and said nothing. After a long quiet, Beatrice took out a fresh sheet of paper. To Lady Markham, she said. Martha looked up. Your Grace? If the committee intends to discuss my name, then my name shall be present. Mrs. Vale set aside her sewing. You mean to return to London? For the assembly? Not to Calderwick House. It will be unpleasant. Beatrice dipped the pen. So was being absent from my own life. Her hand was steady as she wrote. Her Grace the Duchess of Calderwick will attend the committee assembly at Hanover Square Rooms. She folded the note, sealed it, and held it a moment longer than necessary. 40 miles away, London had already decided she was ashamed. It would soon learn she was not. Hanover Square Rooms had been designed to make judgment look like refinement. Its high windows admitted the pale London afternoon in long, disciplined panels, and the polished floor reflected hems of silk, black coats, and the careful movements of women who could ruin a reputation without lifting their voices. Beatrice entered with Mrs. Vale at her side and felt the room notice her before the footman finished announcing her name. That was the strange mercy of disgrace. It made invisibility impossible. Conversations thinned, then resumed in softer tones. Fans opened. Heads bent. A woman near the pianoforte whispered behind a gloved hand, and another looked at Beatrice with an expression of sympathy so well rehearsed that it was almost indistinguishable from appetite. Beatrice wore dark blue silk, plain enough to deny vanity and fine enough to deny defeat. The brass key was not at her waist. Its absence felt like a missing pulse. In its place, hidden within her reticule, lay Adrian's second letter and the torn scrap of charity paper with the forged beginning of her initials. She had brought both, not because she intended to display them at once, but because the truth, like a woman entering a hostile room, deserved a companion. Steady, Mrs. Vale murmured beside her. I am, Beatrice answered. She was surprised to find it nearly true. Lady Markham stood near the committee table, tall and severe in violet silk, with a face made for charitable causes that required other people to feel small. She came forward and offered 2 fingers rather than a hand. Your Grace. We are relieved you could attend. Relieved? Beatrice asked. Then I am glad to have soothed the committee. Lady Markham's brows lifted. A few women nearby heard and became attentive. Beatrice saw Lady Verity then, seated slightly behind the committee table, not as chairwoman, never so obvious, but near enough to influence every pause. Ottilie Fane sat beside her in a gown of soft cream, looking pale and dutiful, like a girl brought to witness sorrow rather than help arrange it. When her eyes met Beatrice's, she lowered them at once. Beatrice did not know whether the gesture was guilt or training. She no longer had the patience to care. "We had hoped," Lady Markham said, "that this matter might be addressed discreetly. Then it was unfortunate that it reached the gossip sheets first." A breath moved through the room. Lady Verity smiled, sorrowful and composed. "My dear Beatrice, surely you do not suppose anyone here wished you embarrassment. Lady Markham has only been anxious for clarity." "Clarity is welcome," Beatrice said. "It is confusion that seems to have travelled ahead of me." Lady Markham returned to the table. "Then let us begin." Beatrice took the chair indicated for her. It was not at the centre. It had been placed slightly aside, close enough to be questioned and far enough to imply she was not among those who held authority. Mrs. Vale sat behind her. Beatrice allowed herself one glance toward the entrance. Adrian was not there. She had told herself it did not matter. She had told herself he owed her justice, not rescue. Still, the empty doorway had a weight of its own. Lady Markham unfolded a paper. The committee records show that a subscription was promised in the name of the Duchess of Calderwick and entered under the initials BW. The amount was designated for the Widows' Relief Fund. When the funds did not arrive, a note was sent to Calderwick House. "I did not receive that note until after it had been opened," Beatrice said. "So you have stated." Lady Markham's tone made the words less than belief. "We have also received this." She lifted another folded note. "It bears what appears to be your initials and confirms that the funds were to be delayed until private household matters were settled." Lady Verity lowered her eyes. Such a painful phrase. Beatrice looked at the note but did not reach for it. "May I examine it?" Lady Markham hesitated. That hesitation told Beatrice more than the note did. "Of course." The paper passed from hand to hand until it reached her. Beatrice unfolded it carefully. The first thing she saw was not the handwriting. It was the wax. Calderwick House used dark red wax for household correspondence, black for the Duke's private letters, and blue for the Duchess's charity replies during the season. She had chosen the blue herself so the butler could sort committee matters quickly. This seal was brownish red, too dark for charity and too light for household orders. It was the wax from the West Cabinet's lower drawer, used for ordinary invitations. Someone had known her initials but not the colour of her authority. The mistake was small. To Beatrice, it was a lantern. "This is not my charity seal," she said. Lady Markham frowned. "A seal colour hardly settles a matter." "It does not settle the matter. It begins it." Lady Verity leaned forward with a softness that begged the room to pity her. "Beatrice, no one wants to distress you. But if you have been tired, if letters have confused you, surely it is better to say so than to force the committee into discomfort." Ottilie whispered, "Lady Verity, please." It was almost too low to hear, but Beatrice heard it. So did several others. Lady Verity's hand closed over Ottilie's wrist, lightly enough to seem affectionate. "Hush, my dear. We must be kind." Beatrice looked at the note again. The initials were better than those on the torn scrap. The B had learned restraint. The W still curved too prettily at the end. She could feel the room pressing toward conclusion. A woman who left her husband's dinner. A duchess whose letters went astray. A charity account with her initials. It was not enough for proof. It was more than enough for society. "I did not write this," Beatrice said. Lady Markham's lips tightened. "Then who did?" "That is the question someone hoped you would not ask." A stir ran through the assembly. Lady Verity's eye sharpened. "My dear, accusations without evidence can wound more deeply than mistakes. Then let us be careful with both." The door opened before Lady Markham could reply. Adrian entered without announcement, or perhaps the footman had spoken and the room had swallowed it. He wore a dark coat and no expression society could safely interpret. Behind him stood Mr. Cale with a leather folio. Beatrice felt the room shift again, but this time the movement did not lean against her. It made space. A duke brought his own weather into any room. Adrian crossed to the committee table and bowed first to Lady Markham, then to Beatrice. Not over her. Not around her. To her. Your Grace, he said. The title, spoken that way, was not possession. It was acknowledgement. Beatrice did not know what to do with the ache it opened. Lady Markham recovered first. Your Grace, this is a committee matter. It concerns the Duchess of Calderwick. It therefore concerns me. But I will not speak in her place. He turned slightly, positioning himself beside Beatrice's chair, not before it. Any insult to her Grace will be answered by me, but the truth will be spoken by her. The silence that followed was different from the one at Calderwick House. That silence had watched her fall. This one waited to see whether she would stand. Beatrice's hand tightened around the forged note. Adrian noticed. His hand moved a fraction, then stopped, open at his side. An offering, not a claim. She looked at it, then at him. For one brief second, she let her fingertips rest against his glove. Nothing more. It was enough to steady the breath she refused to lose. She withdrew her hand and faced the committee. The note is false. The wax is wrong. The initials are imitated. The original letter sent to me was opened before I received it. A servant dismissed for supposed carelessness can testify that committee correspondence was removed from my tray. And I possess a torn scrap from another opened letter bearing the beginning of the same forged hand. Lady Verity's smile had become very still. How dramatic that sounds. Servants, scraps, wax. Are we to make a trial of every household inconvenience? Adrian looked at her. If household inconvenience has been used to injure my wife, yes. Lady Markham tapped the forged note. This is serious, Your Grace. It was serious before the Duchess entered the room, Adrian said. It became uncomfortable only when she did. Beatrice saw Lady Markham absorb that and dislike him for making the distinction plain. Then Lady Verity moved. She did not rise fully, only lifted a small parcel from the table beside her and placed it where everyone could see. A folded handkerchief opened around a key. Not Beatrice's old brass key. A newer one. Smaller. Bright where the file had cut its teeth. Then perhaps, Lady Verity said, each word gentle as a needle, Her Grace can explain why a copied key was found among her own things. The room went utterly silent. Beatrice looked at the key. Adrian looked at Beatrice. And in that suspended moment, the hand he had offered her remained open, waiting for whether she would take it again or walk out alone. The copied key lay on Lady Verity's handkerchief like a verdict already polished for society. Its bright new teeth caught the light from the tall windows, and every woman at the committee table leaned toward it by the smallest possible degree, because scandal was most delicious when it appeared to have evidence. Beatrice did not reach for it. She had learned, in that instant, that touching a thing placed to condemn you could make the room believe it had always belonged in your hand. Lady Markham stared at the key, then at Beatrice. Among her Grace's things? In a drawer at Larkmere House, Lady Verity said, with sorrow arranged perfectly over triumph. A drawer in the east bedroom, wrapped in linen. I hesitated to mention it, but after so much has been suggested about my motives, I fear duty requires candor. Mrs. Vale stood at once behind Beatrice's chair. That is impossible. Lady Verity turned her softest look upon her. Mrs. Vale, affectioned as you credit, but loyalty is not proof. Adrian did not move. That was what Beatrice noticed first. Not because he believed Lady Verity. She did not think he did. His face had gone still in the way it did when a problem became dangerous enough for calculation. He was a duke, a political man, a master of questions. He understood that the wrong word could turn a room. He also did not yet understand that some rooms had already turned against a woman before she entered them. Lady Markham lifted the key with 2 fingers. Your Grace, can you account for this? Beatrice looked at the key, then at Lady Verity. No. Because it is not mine. Yet it was found where you are staying, Lady Verity said. How troubling for you. By whom? Beatrice asked. Lady Verity blinked. I beg your pardon. Who found it? A pause. Too brief for most ears. Long enough for Beatrice. A maid sent to deliver linen, Lady Verity said. She was distressed and brought it to me. A maid from Calderwick House. One who wished to spare you further embarrassment. Martha's dismissal, the opened letters, the altered seating plan, the whispered concern, all of it had taught Beatrice a new fluency. She could hear structure beneath sweetness. "How considerate," she said. Lady Markham folded her hands. "Perhaps we should not descend into a dispute over servants. The object remains." Adrian's voice cut through the murmur. "Objects can be planted." Several faces turned toward him with the startled discomfort of people who preferred a duchess guilty to an aunt deceitful. Lady Verity looked wounded. "Adrian! Do not say my name as if it were a leash." Beatrice should have felt steadied by that. Part of her did. Then Lady Markham asked, if it was planted, who had access to her Grace's room at Larkmere? Adrian turned toward Beatrice. His eyes were intent, urgent, not doubtful. Yet when he spoke, the question came in the cold public shape of inquiry. "Who had access to your room?" The silence changed. Beatrice felt it. So did he, a fraction too late. He had not asked, "Did someone enter without your knowledge?" He had not said, "We will learn who placed it there." He had asked her to account for the path by which guilt had approached her. The old wound opened with no noise at all. At Calderwick House, she had been asked to endure one evening. In this room, she was being asked to map the possibility of her own undoing before those who already doubted her. Her fingers left his glove. He looked down at the space where they had touched. "Beatrice," he said quietly, "you still begin with what I must prove." His face altered, struck not by anger but by understanding. "That isn't what I meant. Meaning is a private luxury." They heard the question. A faint sound moved around the table. Lady Verity lowered her eyes, hiding whatever victory might have risen there. Ottilie Fane's face had gone white. "Your Grace," the girl whispered, "I don't think she did it." Lady Verity's hand closed around Ottilie's wrist again. "Hush. You know nothing of the matter." This time, Ottilie flinched openly. Beatrice saw it. She filed it away. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But information. Lady Markham cleared her throat. The committee cannot ignore a key found among her Grace's possessions. Then the committee must also not ignore that the key is new, Beatrice said. She rose. The room rose with her in fragments, men first, then women who remembered rank despite appetite. "Look at the cut. Look at the brightness. Look at the teeth. My key is old brass, worn smooth where years of hands have held it. That key has never opened a household for 3 years. It was made recently." Lady Markham looked uncertain for the first time. Lady Verity recovered quickly. "A copied key would naturally be new, my dear." "Yes," Beatrice said. "That is precisely the point." Adrian stepped closer. "Let me have it examined." Beatrice turned to him. "No. I will." "Beatrice, allow me to help." "You may help by not asking me, in front of the women prepared to judge me, how such a thing could have entered my room." The sentence was quiet. It did more than a cry would have done. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. Not in surrender to the room. In acknowledgement to her. "You are right." The admission startled Lady Markham so much that her fan stopped midair. Beatrice did not let the softness it stirred weaken her. "Mrs. Vale, we are leaving." "Your Grace," Lady Markham said. "This matter is not concluded." Beatrice looked back at the committee table. "No. It is not. But it will not be concluded by placing an object before me and asking me to explain a crime I did not commit. I will find the man who made that key." Lady Verity gave a small, regretful sigh. "And if he says the order came from you?" "Then at least we shall have found the man," Beatrice replied. She inclined her head, not deeply enough to flatter anyone. "Good afternoon." She left the room before outrage could decide on its costume. Mrs. Vale followed, steady as a guard. Behind them, voices began at once, not loudly, never loudly. Beatrice reached the corridor, where the air was cooler and less perfumed, and only then allowed herself one hand against the wall. Adrian came after her but stopped several feet away. That distance saved him from another mistake. "I believed you," he said. "I know." The answer cost her more than accusation. "But you asked as though belief were waiting for procedure." He absorbed that. Rain tapped against the windows at the far end of the corridor. A footman pretended not to hear. "Tell me what you intend," Adrian said. There was a silversmith at Calderwick House. Martha saw Lady Verity near the cabinet with wax after he came. "I have men looking." "Then I shall look as well. It may not be proper for you to go alone." Her eyes lifted to his. "I am not a fool. Mrs. Vale will come. Martha may know the servant who admitted him. I do not need solitude. I need not to be managed." Pain crossed his face, controlled and deserved. "Then I will not manage you." "Good. But I will not stop seeking the truth." "I did not ask you to stop." They stood there, 3 feet apart, closer than they had been in years and farther than he could bear. At last Adrian said, "I am sorry for the question." Beatrice's hand closed around her reticule, where the torn scrap of forged handwriting remained. "Be sorry enough to ask better ones." Then she walked away. That evening, back at Larkmere, Beatrice sat with Martha and Mrs. Vale at the small writing table, turning over every detail the maid could remember. The silversmith had been middle-aged, with a narrow face, a dark beard, and a leather case marked with a Bond Street direction. He had been sent first to Lady Verity's sitting room, then kept waiting near the west corridor. He spoke to Mr. Ellis, Martha said. The second footman. I heard him ask whether the west cabinet had a difficult lock. Beatrice's pen stopped. "You are certain?" "Yes, Your Grace." He laughed about old houses having old teeth. Mrs. Vale looked up sharply. "Old teeth?" Beatrice wrote the phrase. Across London, in the steward's office of Calderwick House, Adrian found the matching wound in the household repair book. Jewel case clasp, Lady Verity Street Moor. Bond Street silversmith. Paid not from the household account, but through Lady Verity's companion, Miss Greaves. He closed the ledger and remained still. Beatrice had been right. Again. This time, he would not arrive with a question that made her stand alone beneath it. This time, he would bring the receipt. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Adrian stood in a narrow Bond Street shop that smelled of metal filings, lamp oil, and polished brass, listening to a silversmith lie badly because the man had not expected a duke to ask questions in person. Mr. Wilkes was a compact man with a dark beard trimmed close to the jaw and hand stained by honest work, though his eyes had the restless shine of someone who had accepted a dishonest errand and regretted only the witness. The shop windows displayed buckles, snuff-box hinges, tea strainers, and delicate repairs meant for ladies who preferred usefulness to look like ornament. Adrian placed the household repair book on the counter, open to the entry in Mr. Cale's careful hand. "You came to Calderwick House to mend a jewel case clasp for Lady Verity Street Moor." Mr. Wilkes bowed too quickly. "Yes, Your Grace." "A simple clasp. Nothing more." Nothing more is seldom written through a companion's private payment. Adrian laid the receipt beside the book. "Miss Greaves paid you from Lady Verity's purse, not the household account." The silversmith looked at the receipt as though it had betrayed him by surviving. Ladies often prefer discretion in small domestic matters. This was not domestic. Adrian drew from his pocket the description Martha had given. "You asked a footman whether the west cabinet had a difficult lock. You were seen waiting near that corridor. A copied key was produced afterward." Mr. Wilkes swallowed. Behind him, an apprentice stopped polishing a buckle. "Send the boy upstairs," Adrian said. The silversmith obeyed at once. When they were alone, the shop seemed smaller. Outside, carriages moved along Bond Street with their usual indifference, wheels hissing over damp stone. Adrian waited. He had learned from Beatrice, too late, that silence could be cruelty. He used it now only because the man before him had earned the discomfort. Mr. Wilkes wiped his hands on a cloth. "I never saw the cabinet opened, Your Grace." "That is not an answer." "I was given a wax impression." "By whom?" "A lady's companion." "Miss Greaves. She said it was for Lady Verity, and that her Grace was tired of carrying the same key between London and the country. She said a spare was requested." Adrian's fingers curled once, then stilled. Did she use the Duchess's name? Yes, Your Grace. Did you believe her? Mr. Wilkes looked down. I believed the money. The honesty, late and ugly, was still more useful than excuses. Was there anything unusual about the impression? Adrian asked. The silversmith hesitated, then opened a drawer and removed a small folded paper. Inside lay a flattened oval of darkened wax. A thread of faded blue silk clung to one edge, no longer than half an inch, but bright enough to wound. Adrian did not touch it at first. He only looked at it and saw Beatrice's ribbon torn at Calderwick House, not in the drawing-room alone, but earlier, perhaps when her key had been pressed and handled by another's design. Why keep it? He asked. Insurance, Mr. Wilkes said miserably. Not against Your Grace. Against the lady. She seemed the sort who might deny instructing me if trouble came. She is. Adrian took the wax impression and the receipt. You will write a statement. Plain facts. No embroidery. If you attempt to leave London before this matter is settled, I will know. Mr. Wilkes paled. Your Grace, I don't want scandal. Neither did my wife. That did not spare her. By afternoon, Adrian had enough to expose a plot, but not enough to understand its hunger. The hunger lay in Lady Verity's debts, and Mr. Cale found them where polite ruin often hid, behind old family obligations and newer lies. Notes had been endorsed for a brother whose gaming losses had been called investments. A creditor had been pressing through discreet channels. Lady Verity's allowance would not answer the amount. Calderwick patronage might. Charity subscriptions, committee influence, access to household accounts, the ability to approve or delay payments under the Duchess's initials, all of it formed a bridge over an abyss Beatrice had never known she was expected to fill. Adrian read the documents in his study while rain darkened the glass behind him. The brass key lay in the drawer at his right, and the wax impression with the blue thread lay on the desk. He imagined Lady Verity watching Beatrice move through the house with that old key at her waist, not seeing a niece by marriage, not seeing a woman, not even seeing a duchess. Seeing access. Seeing obstruction. Seeing a lock to be copied. He sent for Ottilie. She arrived pale, with her hands twisted in front of her and no Lady Verity to arrange her expression. Sit, Miss Fane. I'd rather stand, Your Grace. That is your choice. She looked startled by the word. Adrian placed the receipt on the desk. Did you know my aunt meant you to replace her Grace in the household? Ottilie's eyes filled. Not replace. Do not choose the gentler word unless it is the true one. Her chin trembled. She said the Duchess was unhappy. She said great houses sometimes needed a warmer face. She said if I pleased the right people, there would be security for me. Security. I have none. The words broke out with the shame of someone who had been raised to understand poverty as a moral stain. My father left debts. My aunt took me in only because Lady Verity asked it. I know I shouldn't have listened, but when everyone looked at her Grace, they looked as if she already possessed everything. I didn't think one chair, one receiving line, one dinner would matter so much. Adrian regarded her in cold sorrow. That is how theft begins among the well-bred. One chair. One line. One evening. Ottilie covered her mouth. I'm sorry. Do not spend your apology on me. She nodded, tears slipping silently now. Lady Verity said her Grace would retire to the country if pressed gently. She said the Duke would not make a scene. She said you hated scenes. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. There it was. His own nature had been made into a weapon against his wife. She was correct about one thing, he said. I did hate scenes. I mistook that for discipline. Ottilie looked toward the door. What will happen to me? That depends on whether you tell the truth when asked. I will. I don't want to be used anymore. Adrian's answer was quiet. Then stop being useful to lies. Near evening, he drove to Larkmere with the receipt, the wax impression, the silversmith statement, and the first outline of Lady Verity's debts. He had thought victory would feel cleaner. Instead, the closer he came to the modest Kent house, the more each proof seemed to accuse him alongside his aunt. Beatrice had lived under the weight of this design while he had called her quiet, tired, overburdened, indispensable in the same breath that he left her undefended. When his carriage stopped at the gate, he again sent his card instead of entering. This time Beatrice received him in the morning room without making him wait long enough to punish him. That, too, humbled him. Mrs. Vale sat near the hearth. Martha stood by the sideboard, ready to be useful and unable to hide her anxiety. Beatrice wore a brown day dress and no ornament except a plain ribbon at her throat. She looked rested in body and guarded in soul. Adrian laid the papers on the table between them. Mr. Wilkes made the key from a wax impression delivered through Miss Greaves. He kept the impression. There is a thread from your blue ribbon in the wax. Beatrice did not touch it. She looked at the thread, and he saw the moment she understood that the theft had reached back before the dinner, before the charity note, before the room had seen her humiliation. So it was planned. Yes. Martha whispered, I knew I saw wax. Beatrice turned to her. You did. And because you told the truth, it has somewhere to stand. Martha's eyes lowered, shining. Adrian placed the debt papers beside the receipt. Lady Verity needed access to patronage and household funds. She had obligations she could not meet. You were not careless, Beatrice. You were in her way. Beatrice gave a faint, humorless smile. How reassuring to learn I was not disliked for my personality alone. The remark was sharp enough to be pain, not wit. Adrian accepted it. I want to clear your name publicly. You want? Yes. But I will do it whether you come home or not. That brought her gaze to his. Do not say that because you think it noble. I say it because it is true. He stood very still, refusing the old instinct to cross the room, take her hands, and plead before he had earned the right even to ask. I want you home. I want it more than I have wanted anything in my life. But I will defend your name even if you never choose me again. Mrs. Vale's knitting had gone motionless. Martha looked at the floor. Beatrice's face did not soften, yet something in her eyes shifted, like a candle shielded from a draught rather than extinguished. That is the first thing you have said that does not make my forgiveness the center of your repentance, she said. Then I should have said it sooner. Yes. The answer was immediate. It struck him and steadied him at once. Yes, you should have. Before he could reply, the caretaker's boy appeared at the door with a letter on a salver. For Her Grace. From Calderwick House. Beatrice took it and broke the seal. Her eyes moved once across the page. Then she handed it to Adrian. The handwriting was Lady Verity's, elegant and venomous beneath courtesy. If Her Grace desires her place, she may come and claim it before those who have doubted her. Adrian looked up. Beatrice had gone very quiet. Not frightened. Not defeated. Decided. She thinks I will refuse, she said. Will you? Adrian asked. Beatrice folded the letter with exquisite care. No. This time, I will enter by the front door. Beatrice did not sleep the night before she returned to Calderwick House, but sleeplessness did not leave her weak. It left her clear. At dawn, Larkmere House was pale and quiet, its small windows silvered by mist and its garden dripping from the rain that had passed before morning. Mrs. Vale found her in the breakfast parlour with 3 papers laid in order before her, Lady Verity's invitation, the silversmith's statement, and the torn scrap of charity letter bearing the first awkward curve of the forged initials. Martha stood near the sideboard, holding a folded shawl as though it were armour. Your Grace, His Grace sent word, Mrs. Vale said. His carriage can be here within the hour. Beatrice looked up. No, Mrs. Vale did not argue. She had learned, as Adrian was learning, that there were moments when a woman's refusal was not pride, but the only sound left of her liberty. Shall I send a reply? Tell His Grace I will arrive in my own carriage, with you beside me. Martha will follow later if she chooses to give testimony. Martha's face lifted at once. I choose, Your Grace. Beatrice softened. You owe me nothing that would endanger you. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but I was endangered when I was silent. The answer stayed with Beatrice longer than comfort would have done. By 10 o'clock, she was dressed in deep violet silk with no jewels except her wedding ring and a plain brooch that had belonged to her mother. She did not wear the brass key. She could not. That object waited at Calderwick House, and the thought of seeing it again made the old wound stir, but she did not touch the place at her waist where it used to hang. Some absences had to be endured until they changed shape. The journey to London took the better part of the day, though the distance felt less like 40 miles than 3 years folded into road and rain. Mrs. Vale sat opposite her, hands calm over her reticule. Martha rode in the second carriage with Mr. Pritchard, the caretaker, who had insisted that no maid should travel into a storm of aristocrats without at least one honest man nearby. Beatrice had almost smiled at that. As they neared Mayfair, the air changed. The hedgerows gave way to stone fronts, iron railings, tall windows, and streets where every curtain seemed capable of judgment. Calderwick House appeared at last, broad and golden in the late afternoon light, its steps washed clean, its door shining black beneath the fanlight. Beatrice had left it through that door under rain and humiliation. Now she returned beneath a sky that had not decided whether to clear. The carriage stopped. Mr. Harrow opened the door before the footman could reach it. The butler's face was composed, but his eyes were not. "Your Grace," he said, and bowed lower than ceremony required. Beatrice stepped down. For one breath, the threshold seemed to rise before her like a wall. Inside that hall, she had once understood that a wife could be present and still erased. Inside that hall, Adrian had called her name too late. Now he stood beneath the staircase, dressed in black, motionless with the strain of not coming forward. He had obeyed her before she had spoken. That, more than any speech, shook her. "Your Grace," he said. His voice did not claim her. It received her. Beatrice crossed the first step, then stopped exactly where she had paused on the night she left. Mrs. Vale stood one pace behind her. Martha's carriage wheels sounded in the square. The house waited. "I have conditions," Beatrice said. Adrian bowed his head. "Name them." "No one speaks for me." "Agreed." "Lady Verity must be present." "She is in the drawing room." "Miss Fane must answer questions directly, not through your aunt." "Agreed." "No servant who tells the truth will be dismissed, threatened, or denied a reference." "Already ordered." "I will repeat it before witnesses." Beatrice looked past him toward the open drawing-room doors. She could see Mr. Cale near the side table, a leather folio in his hands. Beside him stood a solicitor she recognized from her marriage settlement, Mr. Anstruther, narrow and grave. 2 patronesses were present as well, Lady Markham and Lady Davenel, both seated with the discomfort of women who had come to see a scandal and discovered they might be asked to remember their own part in it. "You have brought witnesses," Beatrice said. "As you asked." "I had not yet asked you." "No," Adrian said. "You had already taught me why you should not need to ask twice." The words were quiet enough that no one beyond the hall could hear. Beatrice let them rest between them without answering. He did not reach for her. He did not plead. He only stood aside, leaving the path open. On a silver salver near the entrance to the drawing-room lay the old brass key. The faded blue ribbon was folded beside it, torn through one end. Beatrice saw it and felt every eye she could not yet see. Her fingers tightened on her reticule, but she did not touch the key. "Not yet." "May I stand beside you?" Adrian asked. The question struck the room behind its quiet. It contained the shape of his mistake and the beginning of its repair. Beatrice looked at him then. Truly looked. The man before her was still the Duke of Calderwick, still powerful, still disciplined, still capable of making a room obey with one sentence. But he was no longer standing where he expected obedience from her. He was waiting to be permitted near the truth she had carried without him. "Beside," she said. "Not before." His eyes darkened. "Beside." Together, they entered the drawing-room. Conversation did not stop because there had been none to begin with. Lady Verity sat near the hearth in a gown of morning lavender, her posture elegant, her hands folded as if she had come to endure an unpleasant family duty rather than answer for harm. Ottilie stood near the window, pale and tense, with Miss Greaves behind her. Lady Verity's companion looked at the carpet and did not raise her head. The silver salver with the key remained behind Beatrice, visible from the room like a small brass memory of the night everything changed. Lady Markham inclined her head. Your Grace. Beatrice returned the gesture. Lady Markham. Lady Davenel's diamonds flashed as she shifted. I hope this may be settled with dignity. So do I, Beatrice said. Dignity was not offered to me when my name was discussed in my absence, but I am willing to bring enough for the room. A faint colour rose in Lady Davenel's cheeks. Adrian said nothing. He had promised. Lady Verity sighed, tender and tired. Beatrice, must we begin with reproach? We are all family in some sense. No, Beatrice said. We are not all family. Some are witnesses. Some are servants of truth. Some are victims of convenience. And one of us has hidden behind family long enough. Lady Verity's eye sharpened. You have been ill-used by your own imagination. Martha entered then with Mr. Pritchard behind her and stopped near Mrs. Pike, who had emerged from the side door with her keys at her waist. For the first time, Beatrice noticed how many women in that house had carried keys, trays, letters, and fears for years, each expected to move silently through the ambitions of others. Beatrice opened her reticule and removed the torn scrap of charity letter. This was in my hand when I left this house. It came from a letter addressed to me, opened before I received it. The paper matches the forged note shown at Hanover Square Rooms. Mr. Anstruther stepped forward. I have compared the stock, Your Grace. It appears to be the same. Lady Verity smiled. Appears is an uncertain word for such a serious accusation. Then we shall add certainty as we go, Beatrice replied. She turned to Ottilie. Miss Fane, when Lady Verity told you to stand beside His Grace, what did she say the room must see? Ottilie's lips parted. Lady Verity snapped, the child is distressed. Beatrice did not look away from Ottilie. Answer me, not her. Ottilie trembled, then whispered, she said the room must see what was possible. The silence that followed was soft, but it was no longer empty. It had begun to fill with shape. Adrian remained beside Beatrice, still as a vow he had not yet earned the right to speak. Then the drawing-room door opened again, and Lady Verity turned. She saw Mr. Wilkes, the Bond Street silversmith, standing beside Mr. Cale with his hat crushed in both hands. For the first time since Beatrice had known her, Lady Verity Streetmore lost the colour in her face. Mr. Wilkes did not look like a man prepared to ruin a lady. He looked like a man who had risen that morning hoping cowardice might be mistaken for prudence and had discovered, too late, that a duke's carriage could bring conscience to one's door. He stood just inside the drawing-room with his hat crushed between both hands, rain still darkening the shoulders of his coat, while every person in the room measured how much truth a tradesman might be permitted to speak before rank tried to smother him. Lady Verity recovered first. She always did. Adrian, she said, with a delicate lift of her brows, you cannot mean to parade shopkeepers before ladies. Adrian did not move from Beatrice's side. No one objected when a shopkeeper's work was used to accuse my wife. The quiet force of that answer settled over the room. Lady Markham's gaze flicked toward the silver salver in the hall, where the old brass key lay beside its torn blue ribbon. Lady Davenel lowered her fan. Mr. Anstruther, the solicitor, opened his notebook with the dry, patient motion of a man who trusted paper more than performance. Beatrice looked at Mr. Wilkes. You made a key from a wax impression. It was not a question. The silversmith bowed his head. Yes, Your Grace. Lady Verity let out a wounded little sound. The man is frightened. He will say whatever he thinks His Grace wishes to hear. Beatrice turned slightly, not toward Adrian, but toward the solicitor. Mr. Anstruther, has Mr. Wilkes given a written statement? He has, Your Grace. Signed in my presence, witnessed by Mr. Cale. Then let him say only what is necessary. Mr. Wilkes swallowed. A wax impression was delivered to my shop by Miss Greaves, companion to Lady Verity Streetmore. I was told Her Grace required a spare key, because the old key was inconvenient to carry between residencies. The payment came through Miss Greaves. I delivered the copied key to her hands. Miss Greaves, standing near the window, swayed as if the stays beneath her gown had become too tight. Lady Verity's head turned toward her slowly. Caroline, she said. Remember yourself. Miss Greaves pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Beatrice saw the terror there, not of guilt alone, but of years spent obeying a woman who called obedience loyalty. "Miss Greaves," Beatrice said, "did Lady Verity instruct you to carry the wax impression?" The companion closed her eyes. "Yes, Your Grace." The word fell softly. It broke something large. Lady Verity rose. "This is absurd. A companion will say anything to keep her place." "You have made that easy to believe," Beatrice replied. "You taught everyone in your reach that their place depended upon pleasing you." Lady Verity's nostrils flared, but Beatrice did not let the room be drawn into emotion before fact. She placed the torn scrap of charity letter on the table. "This was taken from a letter addressed to me and opened before I received it. The initials begin in a hand trying to imitate mine." Mr. Anstruther set a second paper beside it. "This is the note shown at Hanover Square Rooms. The paper stock matches. The forged initials are developed from the same hand." Lady Markham leaned closer despite herself. "And the seal?" Beatrice lifted the forged committee note. "Wrong wax. My charity replies during the season are sealed in blue. This was sealed with wax from the West Cabinet's lower drawer, used for ordinary invitations. Someone knew my initials, but not my method." Mrs. Pike, who had stood near the side door with the rigid endurance of a housekeeper afraid to breathe too loudly, stepped forward at Beatrice's glance. "Your Grace, I saw Lady Verity near the West Cabinet on the morning after the silversmith came. She had a small wax disc in her hand and closed her fist when she saw me." Lady Verity's laugh was brittle. "Mrs. Pike has served too long below stairs. Servants imagine mystery in every corridor." Adrian's face hardened. "Mrs. Pike has served this house with more honor than anyone who has used rank to make truth afraid." Mrs. Pike's eyes shone, but she did not lower them. Mr. Cale then opened his folio. "The ledger shows that committee correspondence for Her Grace was removed from the Duchess's tray over a period of nearly 4 weeks. Several notes were delayed or misfiled. The lower tray was marked in Lady Verity's hand for review." "For household order," Lady Verity snapped. "For household control," Beatrice said. She turned to Ottilie, who stood pale and trembling beside the curtains. "Miss Fane, you told me Lady Verity said the room must see what was possible. Did she also tell you to prepare to represent the duchy?" Ottilie looked at Lady Verity, then at Adrian, then at Beatrice. Her voice, when it came, was small but clear. "Yes. She said Her Grace was unhappy and would soon withdraw to the country. She said I must learn the order of callers, the charities, and the place of the Duchess's chair. She said if I was useful, I would not be dependent forever." Lady Verity's face flushed with true anger at last. "Ungrateful girl." Ottilie flinched but did not retreat. "I'm sorry, Lady Verity, but it's true." The room seemed to inhale around that simple sentence. Lady Davenel looked down at her diamonds as if they had suddenly become vulgar. Lady Markham's severe face had lost its certainty. Beatrice felt no triumph. Triumph would have required pleasure, and there was none in seeing the machinery of one's humiliation laid bare piece by piece. There was only steadiness. There was only the quiet, necessary act of not disappearing. Lady Verity placed both hands on the back of her chair. "You speak of machinery as though I contrived some monstrous crime. I preserved what others neglected." The House of Calderwick was becoming cold, unwelcoming, politically severe. Beatrice made a ledger of every breath. Adrian vanished into Parliament. Someone had to think of the family's reputation. "And your debts?" Adrian asked. The words landed with devastating calm. Lady Verity went still. Mr. Cale drew out another packet. Notes endorsed for Lord St. Maur's obligations. Creditors pressing through private channels. Requests for advances routed through charitable patronage accounts. Lady Markham looked sharply at Lady Verity. "Charitable accounts?" "No charity money was taken," Lady Verity said quickly. Too quickly. Nothing had yet been taken. Beatrice heard the yet and saw several others hear it too. Adrian stepped forward half a pace, then stopped, remembering. He stayed beside her, not before. "You needed access," Beatrice said. "To correspondence. To patronage. To the authority of the Duchess's initials." You could not command those openly, so you made me appear careless enough that others would accept your hand in my place. Lady Verity's control cracked, not into tears, but into contempt. You were never suited to this house. You had rank, yes. Blood, yes. But no warmth. No charm. No instinct for being loved. You made duty look like a sentence. I offered Adrian a household that could breathe. Beatrice looked at her for a long moment. The insult no longer entered her. It arrived at the door and found no key. Whose family did you mean to save by destroying mine? No one moved. Lady Verity's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no graceful answer. Adrian's voice came low beside Beatrice. My Duchess. He stopped at once, and the correction cost him visibly. The Duchess of Calderwick, whose authority I failed to honor, will not be spoken of in this house as though she were an obstacle to be managed. Beatrice did not look at him, but the words reached her all the same. Not because they healed everything. Because they did not pretend to. Lady Verity turned on him then, abandoning softness entirely. You would ruin your own blood for her. Adrian looked around the drawing room, at the servants who had been afraid, the patronesses who had doubted, the companion who had obeyed, the young woman who had been tempted, and the wife who had stood alone until she no longer would. No, he said. I am saving my house from what you made of it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of witnesses. For several seconds after Adrian spoke, no one in the drawing room seemed willing to breathe first. Lady Verity remained standing behind her chair, one hand pressed against the carved wood, her face stripped of its careful softness. Without the practiced sorrow, without the gentle voice and the lowered lashes, she looked older, not in years, but in defeat. Beatrice had expected satisfaction. She had imagined, during the long road from Larkmere, that the moment Lady Verity was exposed might arrive like sunlight through a shutter. Instead, it came like the lifting of a heavy cloth from something spoiled. Necessary. Airless. Mr. Anstruther turned a page in his notebook. The faint sound recalled the room to consequence. Your Grace, the solicitor said to Adrian, with your permission, I will record the admissions made here and prepare formal notices for the relevant household accounts and charitable committees. You have it, Adrian said. Begin with Lady Markham's committee. The forged note is to be declared false before any further meeting or private letter can repeat it. Lady Markham's face tightened with the discomfort of a woman who had believed herself prudent and found herself useful to a lie. The committee will, of course, correct its records. Beatrice looked at her. Not quietly. Lady Markham went still. Your Grace? My name was questioned where others could hear it. Its correction will not be hidden where only the careful may find it. A flush touched Lady Markham's cheekbones. You are right. A formal apology will be sent and read into the committee minutes. Lady Davenel shifted her fan. And society will hear it, I assure you. Beatrice turned her gaze upon her. Society heard enough from you already, Lady Davenel. This time, let it hear accuracy. The fan closed. No one laughed. Adrian did not smile, though something like fierce pride moved once across his face before he mastered it. Lady Verity saw it and seemed to hate Beatrice more for that restrained pride than for the exposure itself. How noble everyone has become, she said. A few delayed letters, a copied key, and suddenly I am to be treated as though I set fire to the house. No, Beatrice said. You merely removed the air from it and called that order. Mr. Cale stepped forward with the packet concerning Lady Verity's debts. Adrian took it, then placed it unopened before Mr. Anstruther. My aunt will leave Calderwick House before evening. Her allowance will be administered through your office until her obligations are settled. She will have no access to household funds, charitable subscriptions, correspondence, patronage lists, or estate instructions. No letter from her will be sent under the Calderwick seal. Lady Verity's composure broke into outrage. You would put me under a solicitor as if I were a reckless girl? No, Adrian said. As a reckless woman who used my wife's authority to approach money that was not yours. I did it for the family. You did it because debt frightened you more than dishonor. The blow landed cleanly because it was true. Miss Greaves began to cry without sound near the window. Ottilie Fane stood rigid beside her, face white, eyes fixed on Beatrice as if awaiting sentence from the woman whose chair she had nearly accepted. Beatrice could have ruined her with one sentence. The room expected it. That expectation, too, was a kind of hunger. "Miss Fane," Beatrice said. Ottilie stepped forward. "Yes, Your Grace." "You knew I was being pressed aside." Ottilie's chin trembled. "Yes. You did not begin the design." "No, but I liked what it promised." "I shouldn't have. I told myself it wasn't truly harm if everyone seemed to prefer it." Her tears fell then. She did not make a display of them. "I'm sorry. Not because I've been caught. Because I see now that I was willing to be saved by making you disappear." Beatrice held her gaze. There was no warmth in the room, but there was truth. "Then remember the shame of that clearly. It may yet make you kinder." Adrian spoke to Mr. Anstruther without looking away from Beatrice. "Miss Fane will be sent to Bath under the supervision of her aunt, Mrs. Armitage. She will not be sponsored by Calderwick House this season. If she tells the truth when asked, no false charge will be laid against her." Ottilie curtsied, shaking. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Thank you, Duchess." Lady Verity gave a bitter laugh. "Mercy now? How pretty. You enjoy power after all, Beatrice." Beatrice looked at the older woman and felt, with strange calm, that Lady Verity could no longer reach her. "No. I understand it better after watching you misuse it." Adrian crossed to the salver in the hall. For the first time since she entered, Beatrice allowed herself to look fully at the old brass key. It lay beside the torn ribbon, dull and familiar, no larger than her palm, yet heavy with every morning she had unlocked duties no one praised and every evening she had closed away hurts no one saw. Adrian brought it back with both hands, but he did not place it in hers. He stopped before her, in the center of the room, with servants, patronesses, solicitor, steward, companion, and accusers all watching. "This belongs to you," he said. His voice was steady, but the effort beneath it was visible. "Not because you are useful to the house. Not because you saved me from scandal. Not because the evidence proves you were wronged. It belonged to you when I failed to defend it." Beatrice's throat tightened. She did not reach yet. Adrian lowered his gaze, not in shame performed for the room, but in humility learned too late. "I am sorry for the night you left. I am sorrier for the months before it, when I let silence sit beside you and thought it was peace. I corrected insults to your title and missed the injuries to your person. I guarded the dignity of the Duke of Calderwick while the Duchess of Calderwick stood alone in my own house." No one moved. Even Lady Verity had no answer ready. Adrian held the key out a little farther. "You do not have to take it. If it feels like a chain, leave it here. If you choose never to wear it again, I will still clear your name, protect your authority, and answer for what I allowed." Beatrice looked at the key, then at the man holding it. This was what she had once longed for without words, not rescue, not romance spoken before witnesses, but the terrible honesty of a powerful man admitting that his power had failed where it mattered most. She took the key. The metal was warm from his hand. The old ribbon remained on the salver. She did not tie it to her waist yet. "There will be reforms," she said. Adrian bowed his head. "Name them." She turned so the room heard every word. "All correspondence addressed to the Duchess will come directly to my hand or to a secretary I appoint. No family member will review charity letters, subscription accounts, or patronage lists without my written permission. Servants may report improper orders without fear of dismissal or ruined references. Charity accounts will be copied monthly for my inspection and yours. Any person who speaks in my name without authority will be removed from this house." Mrs. Pike's hand rose briefly to her own keys. Martha Ives lowered her head, but not before Beatrice saw the relief in her face. Mr. Harrow stood straighter than he had in weeks. Adrian said, "Agreed. Not as a kindness. As law within this house. Not until I am pleasant again." His eyes darkened. "Whether you are pleasant or furious or silent, your authority does not depend upon my comfort." Beatrice looked at him for one long moment. Then she threaded the key through the plain violet ribbon at her throat and tied it there, not at her waist where it had once hung as duty, but near her heart where its weight could be chosen. A breath moved through the room. It was not applause. It was better. Recognition without noise. Lady Verity turned away first. "I will not be made a spectacle." Adrian's voice followed her, cold and final. "You made one of my wife. You will endure being corrected by truth." Mr. Anstruther stepped to the door to arrange her removal. Miss Greaves followed, weeping. Ottilie remained only long enough to curtsy to Beatrice, then withdrew. One by one, the witnesses understood that the great scene had ended, but its consequences had only begun. When the room had thinned, Adrian stood beside Beatrice, still not touching her. "If you come home," he said quietly, "let it be because this house has become worthy of you." The key rested against her pulse. Beatrice looked around the drawing-room where she had once left empty-handed, then back at him. "I will come to Harrowmere first," she said. "Home must prove itself." His pain was visible, but he did not argue. "Then Harrowmere will wait for your judgment." "No," she said. "It will meet it." And for the first time since the carriage had carried her into the rain, Beatrice did not feel she was leaving something behind. She felt the house standing still, waiting to learn whether it deserved to keep her. 3 weeks after the drawing-room fell silent around Lady Verity's disgrace, Beatrice arrived at Harrowmere Park in a carriage that bore the Calderwick crest but carried no command. That difference mattered. It mattered more than the sweep of the long drive, more than the oaks standing dark and steady on either side, more than the great grey house rising beyond the lawns with its windows catching the pale afternoon sun. Harrowmere had always been the principal seat of the Dukes of Calderwick, a place of stone, order, and inherited expectation. In the early days of her marriage, Beatrice had walked its corridors as though every portrait on the wall were asking whether she understood the honour of being permitted there. Now she sat upright beside Mrs. Vale with the brass key resting against the violet ribbon at her throat and understood something she had not known then. A house could be old without being wise. A title could be ancient without being just. A wife could return without surrendering. When the carriage stopped, Adrian was waiting at the foot of the steps. Not with a line of servants arranged to impress her, though the household stood properly behind him. Not with flowers. Not with a speech prepared for witnesses. He stood alone a little ahead of the others, hat in hand, letting the house remain behind him instead of using it as weight. Beatrice saw that choice before she saw his face, and the careful place inside her where hope had been forbidden gave one quiet ache. Mr. Harrow had come down from London to oversee the reception, but Martha Ives stood among the upper servants now, no longer in the plain insecurity of a dismissed maid. Her gown was neat, her cap fresh, and her place was beside Mrs. Pike, who had recommended her for advancement within the household. When Beatrice stepped down, Martha's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She curtsied with steadiness. "Welcome to Harrowmere, Your Grace." The words were simple. They were not loud. Yet Beatrice felt them pass through the gathered staff like a correction written into the air. Not welcome back because she had been retrieved. Not welcome home because the matter had been decided for her. Welcome because she had arrived by choice, and the house had learned to wait. Adrian bowed. "Your Grace." Beatrice inclined her head. "Your Grace." A faint warmth touched his eyes at the formality, not amusement, but acceptance. "The house is ready for your inspection." Inspection sounds severe. It should. I deserve severity. Mrs. Vale made a small sound behind her that might have been approval disguised as a cough. Beatrice looked toward the open doors. "Then let us begin." He did not offer his arm until she looked at it, and when she did not take it immediately, he let it remain an invitation rather than a claim. After a moment, she placed her gloved fingers lightly on his sleeve. The movement was no more than etiquette required. Both of them felt the world inside it. The tour did not linger over tapestries, marble, or ancestral silver. Adrian showed her the new correspondence room first, where a locked cabinet stood beneath the window and a writing table had been placed for her own secretary when she chose to appoint one. A small book lay open on the desk, ruled in Mr. Cale's precise hand. Every letter addressed to the Duchess would be entered by date, sender, seal, and receiving hand. No family member could request access without written permission. Beatrice read the first page in silence. There were already entries from Lady Markham's committee, Lady Davenel, and 2 patronesses who had once whispered more quickly than they apologized. The committee's formal apology lay beside the ledger, its language stiff but clear. Her Grace's name had been cleared in the minutes. The forged note had been withdrawn. The Widows' Relief Fund had received the promised subscription from Calderwick, doubled at Adrian's insistence and entered under his own name, not hers, so no one could mistake generosity for correction of guilt. "I did not add the amount to make you look charitable," Adrian said. "I added it because the women the fund serves should not suffer from what was done in their name." Beatrice looked up. That was well considered. The praise startled him. It startled her too, but she did not take it back. They moved next through the servants' hall, where the new order had been read aloud and pinned near the steward's office. Any servant asked to carry improper instructions could report them without fear of dismissal or damaged reference. Mrs. Pike explained it without trembling. Mr. Harrow, dignified as ever, admitted that his logs had been revised so trays could no longer be altered without record. Martha, when asked about her new position, answered in a clear voice. "I am to assist Mrs. Pike with correspondence trays and linen accounts, Your Grace." "A heavy responsibility," Beatrice said. Martha smiled through her composure. "I have learned that small things can carry great weight." Beatrice's throat tightened, but she only nodded. Justice, she was discovering, was not a single bright moment. It was a series of doors opening for those who had been made to stand outside them. Later, in the morning room that overlooked the south lawn, Adrian placed a small wooden box on the table between them. Mrs. Vale had tactfully remained with Mrs. Pike to discuss travel arrangements, though Beatrice suspected the discussion required very little time. Sunlight fell across the carpet in long bands. Beyond the glass, the park stretched quiet and green. Beatrice opened the box. Inside lay the old faded blue ribbon, carefully folded, its torn end preserved rather than hidden. Beside it rested a new length of ribbon in the same deep violet as the gown she had worn when she returned to Calderwick House. "I did not know whether this was foolish," Adrian said. "It may be." No, her fingers touched the old ribbon. "It is not foolish to remember where something tore." He stood near the mantel, giving her space as faithfully as if distance had become a language he was still practicing. "Lady Verity left for the north 2 days ago. Mr. Anstruther will administer her allowance. Her creditors have been notified that no Calderwick account will answer her private obligations. Miss Fane is in Bath with Mrs. Armitage. She wrote a letter for you. I did not bring it because I did not know whether you wished to receive it." "I will read it some day," Beatrice said. "Not today." "Of course." The quiet settled. It no longer felt empty. Beatrice closed the box but kept her hand resting on the lid. "You have done what you said you would do." "Not enough." "No. Not enough for 3 years." He accepted that with a lowered gaze. No, she looked at him then, at the man who had once seemed carved from rank and restraint, now standing without the protection of either. But enough for these weeks. His breath changed. It was small, almost nothing, but she heard it. He crossed no closer. "Beatrice, I love you." The words came without ceremony. That made them harder to dismiss. "I should have known how to say it before loss taught me the language. I should have understood that a wife can be lonely in a full house. I should have noticed that your quiet was not peace. I love you, but I will not ask that love to pay my debts. If you remain here, let it be because you wish to build something with me, not because I have finally become afraid of living without you." Beatrice looked out toward the lawn. For a moment, she saw herself as she had been when she first arrived at Harrowmere, younger, hopeful, determined to be worthy of a house that had never asked whether it was worthy of her. Then she saw herself at Calderwick House, standing before guests with the key in her hand and all her silence gathered into one sentence. Then she saw the woman she was now, not untouched by pain, not softened into forgetfulness, but whole enough to choose without begging. "I love you," she said. Adrian closed his eyes. He did not move toward her. That restraint was the reason she continued. "But I will not live on gratitude. I will not be cherished in private and diminished in public. I will not be protected only after the wound becomes visible." "No," he said. "You will not. If we begin again, it will not be with me trying to earn the place I already hold." His voice was roughened but steady. Then we begin with me remembering it. Beatrice opened the wooden box again and took out the violet ribbon. Slowly, she untied the one at her throat, slipped the brass key free, and threaded it onto the new silk. Adrian watched as though the motion were a vow being written in a language older than speech. She did not hand it to him. She tied it herself. Then she placed the faded blue ribbon in the box and closed the lid. "May I walk beside you tomorrow?" he asked. Beatrice looked at him, and this time the smile came without wounding her. "Tomorrow, yes. And the day after, if you remember how." He crossed the room then, not quickly, and offered his hand. She took it. His fingers closed around hers with care, not possession. Outside, the afternoon light shifted over Harrowmere Park, touching stone, glass, and grass with the same quiet grace. The key rested near Beatrice's heart. It no longer felt like the weight of a house demanding obedience. It felt like a door waiting for her choice. And when she walked with Adrian to the window, she did not feel that she had been returned to Harrowmere. She had arrived.